Good evening and welcome to tonight's episode of Women Living Intentionally. My name is Renee.
And I'm Tish.
And tonight we have with us LaToya Ntlabati, who is a board certified psychiatric nurse practitioner. In recognition of Mental Health Awareness Month, we have her with us today who will be discussing mental health, different issues that we may be facing in society, as well as what contributes to those types of issues. So welcome, LaToya. We're glad to have you tonight.
Hello.
And so let's get started. We'll turn it over to you so that you could introduce us to introduce yourself to the audience. Just give us a bit of background about who you are, what you represent, all that good stuff like that. So turn it over to you.
Thank you all for tuning in. And as Renee said, my name is LaToya Ntlabati, and I am a psychiatric nurse practitioner. I've been a nurse for 9 years now. And while working in the emergency room and in the military, I noticed a lot of mental health disparities and just disconnections in mental health when it comes to access to care. And so that prompted me to want to study mental health more. And so I went to school and got a master's and became a nurse practitioner focusing in mental health. And so as Renee said, May is Mental Health Awareness Month. And so I really wanted to take this opportunity to discuss trauma and ACE scores and how trauma affects our body. Trauma is an area that I am very fascinated with, and I am in the process of becoming certified in. And so just wanted to raise awareness in our community because trauma really affects the African American community a lot. And I don't think it's something that we fully understand. And even in medicine, we don't fully understand it.
Can you tell us what ACE stands for?
Sure. So ACE is adverse childhood experiences.
And so with ACE, is it something like a test that, you test to figure out, where you fall on a spectrum, or how does that work?
Yes, so there is an ACE score. That is a test that you can take, and it's scored from 0 to 10. And so the higher your ACE score, the more likely or the higher your risk for developing certain conditions or certain diseases. For an example, an ACE score greater than 4 will make a person like 460% likely to develop something like depression. Mm-hmm. And so you take the scale, and there are 10 areas that it focuses on. So it focuses on physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse. It also focuses on physical neglect, emotional neglect. It also focuses on exposure to domestic violence in the home, household substance abuse, household mental illnesses, as well as separation from parents or divorce, and incarceration of a household member. So going through the list, so you can see how a lot of these things impact our community.
Mm-hmm. If I can just jump in, I find it very interesting, LaToya, the reason that you got interested in studying or wanting to know more about mental health. You mentioned you were in the military for some time and you came across a lot of disparities. And you mentioned some of those disparities were access to care.
Yes.
So, and by that you meant the ability to get proper care, or exactly, can you go in a little bit more in detail as to what limited access to care as you found when you were, when you noticed that disparity?
So yes, definitely. When I say access to care, I'm talking about just a person being able to connect and have a provider and be seen for mental illnesses, and also, to be frankly, being seen by for lack of a better term, a good provider, you know, a good fit for you. For example, when you're talking about trauma, and if you've experienced a trauma, if you experience PTSD, it would be great for you to have a provider who is trained in that area, because all providers will be trained to some degree, but there are other providers who specialize in that. And so I noticed in the military and also outside of the military, there are not enough providers, to be honest, to be able to treat, I guess, or handle the load of mental health patients.
Do you find that because there weren't enough trained providers in that particular area, do you find that that's the reason that you became more interested in that field as well? Because as you were became more aware that there was an issue and the lack of care and the access to care, was that part of the reason as to why you yourself wanted to get into it as well?
Almost definitely. I will be honest and say I was first introduced or intrigued by the psych field from my own experiences as far as anxiety, dealing with depression, and then family members that I know who have experienced it as well. And then in the military, just looking at how many people who actually had issues, who, you know, it took a while to be seen, and also the stigmas that was associated with mental illnesses and not wanting to be seen because of the labels that will be attached if I am quote unquote seen by someone.
I think that's a very good point that you bring up, because I think not just, well, as it relates to just seeing a provider for any other thing, sometimes we do get caught up in what other people may think about our treatment or the therapies that we seek out or the type of care that we try to seek out. So I think it's important that we, you know, offer the information so that we can try to, you know, let the community know that, you know, the stigmas may exist. However, you know, the best thing that you can do for yourself is to, one, recognize, or at least if someone else recognizing you, that you can at least have enough support that will give you the understanding that it's okay to seek treatment, even in spite of particular stigmas. What I'm also interested in knowing, you mentioned ACE scores, and as you said, ACE was adverse childhood experiences and how they affect the body. And you mentioned depression specifically. I know in the world of COVID right now, I've heard a lot more people, you know, struggling with their mental state. And I think sometimes I was having a conversation a couple of weeks ago with someone where sometimes we, you know, we look at someone that may look a little different or do things a little different than we do, and we pass it off jokingly saying they got issues, you know, or something like that. But in actuality, I think to some extent we do really have issues, as we quote unquote say we do. But so I think if we can identify, one, the traumas, and then identify how it affects our bodies, and then not be so afraid because of the stigmas attached to all of that to go seek care, I think that that'll put us in a better place and in a better position so that we can, you know, thrive through life, not just survive, but to thrive. So even in the world of COVID, I think that a lot of people are suffering from so many things, when in actuality, it could be very well because of something that happened in our childhood experiences that are bringing those things out. Can you talk to us a little bit about like triggers?
Definitely. And everything that you said is spot on. Something like COVID can definitely trigger things that have kind of been laying dormant, so to speak. For instance, being alone, you know, for, you know, a significant amount of time. COVID required us to be more isolated. And so if you are a person that kind of have adapted the skills or the coping mechanism of being active, being involved, being outgoing, if some of those were your protective factors or things that you've created to kind of protect yourself and be thrive, as you say, with COVID having to be separated and to be isolated, you can no longer do those things that has helped you cope and deal with that. And so another thing is stress, right? Financial stress and financial concerns. If I am worried about how I'm going to provide for my children, if I'm struggling, there may be something that I had experienced as a child when we didn't have everything that we needed, or we, grew up in poverty, but I may, as a defensive mechanism or protective mechanism, I may have blocked that out. Now, being in a situation where I'm faced that I may not be able to provide for my children, that may trigger something that had lied dormant, that I had buried, my brain had naturally buried to protect myself.
Okay. And I think that's very well explained because, we may not always know how to identify something, but we know how we feel. And we may not, and sometimes it just require that isolation maybe to bring that thing out, or that situation, or that particular, if there's something in particular that you may experience in your adult life that you may have kind of tucked away in your childhood, then, sometimes those things, even the smallest inkling, can, kind of give us a flashback, and we might not even realize it until we, seek out some therapies, or seek out, some sort of help from someone. But I think if we are in tune with how we feel, even when those triggers happen, that will help us, try to seek out some of the therapies necessary, or some of the help necessary to try to get ourselves back to where we need to be. So are there particular things that you have come across, or you can recommend, or you can suggest, or even talk to us more about the type of things that we can do to try to get a hold on this mental health situation for our better selves?
Yeah, so the first thing is just awareness, insight, being aware and understanding norm versus, not norm. Because we all go through events, right? We all go through some traumatic experiences, but what separates this trauma from other trauma is not being able to cope, not being able to bounce back, or not being resilient enough, right? And then also you have to deal with, I guess, chronic trauma. Okay. And so that's a whole nother area too. So when you can recognize, okay, I'm worrying a little bit more than what I normally worry, or I'm sad more than what I'm normally sad, or, I notice that when this person comes around, I feel this way, or I notice when that song is played, or I hear that tune, my body just kind of does something, and I really don't understand what it is, but I'm noticing these patterns. Once you notice that, like, being aware is like the first step, right? And then after that, talking to someone and seeking that kind of help, right? Seeking professional help, and then and looking for people who can kind of specialize in the area that you're concerned with, and then taking care of yourself, right? Self-preservation, exercising. I like to do I like to speak to people about mindfulness, just being present, because so many times our minds are scattered and we're like too much in the past and we're too far in the future and we're not really dealing with what's right now. And so if we can learn how to be in the present, it's helpful when it comes to mental health and those experiences. And then also exercise, doing mind body exercises are really great, because what that does is it kind of interconnects both sides of the brain, and kind of makes you be in tune to the thought process and the mind, and also the body. For instance, like in Tai Chi or kickboxing, right? You got to be alert. You got to be focused if you're doing kickboxing. If not, you're going to get hit in the face. So it makes you, it makes you more focused and more alert on the here and now. So those kinds of things are some things that you can do to help in this process of healing and just treating mental health.
You said two very good things that I think are very relevant. One being aware, and then the other being very present. And I think if we are aware, we can stay connected with ourselves so that, like you mentioned, when something just doesn't feel right, or you have a particular situation that makes you feel a certain way, or like you mentioned specifically, you know, when that song is being played, oh, I feel a little different. So if we are aware of ourselves, we can recognize the moment that something just doesn't seem right or something is off. And then, you know, perhaps if we can catch it a little sooner than later, then, you know, perhaps, you know, we won't be in such a place where we feel so so empty or such a void, and we don't feel like, you know, it's a lost cause. Or because personally, I think it's never too late to try to recollect yourself.
Right.
And so, you know, I think that the whole thing with mental health and being mentally healthy is being able to, I think that we all have situations. I think that we all do go through certain things, and we all do have a certain level of trauma. It's how we respond to it, and how we are actively being aware with ourselves and staying connected with ourselves. To me, it's about being resilient too.
Right. And being able to, okay, so what you said is very, very important, because depending on what you went through as a child, some people are less likely to be able to cope and deal with things as an adult.
Mm.
And so if growing up in a household where your parents were on drugs, where you were verbally abused, where you experienced extreme poverty, you may have been bullied in class, right? Even in utero, when you're in your mother's womb, if your mother has experienced stress, right? You growing up and you know, when you're an early when you're a young child, your brain develops differently.
Mm-hmm.
And so because your brain develops differently, you're already set back when it comes to being able to respond to things naturally or normally. For example, the area that we know as fight or flight, right? We hear this all the time. So that is our sympathetic nervous system. That system is designed to protect you from danger. Mm-hmm. So the same system that's designed to protect you from, say, a bear or a car coming at you, your body is kind of revved up so that you can either fight or you can run to protect you. Well, when you're constantly experiencing stress or traumas and all these things as a young child while you're developing, that particular system is hyper aroused, or it works too much. You're hyper vigilant, right? And then the area that's supposed to restore you or rest, that one, it's not kicking in enough. Or it kicks it, it's not kicking enough, or it can kick in too much. And so you have an imbalance of these two systems. And so when you become an adult, and you may not know that, and most people don't understand that, when you go through the loss of a job, when you go through a breakup, when you go through financial stress, when you're having marital problems, and other people around you will be like, well, girl, you need to get your life together. Like, pick yourself up. Like, what are you doing all this crying for? You know, but they don't understand that because you were in a different environment, you are not equipped to deal with it the same.
Right.
Society doesn't understand that. Your close friends, your family, you don't even understand that what a person with a score of 0, as far as ACE scores, they are able to cope and deal with things way differently than the way you are.
Mm-hmm. That's good. This conversation, I appreciate you being here, because it sheds a lot of light for a lot of different areas that we may or may not understand in our adult lives. Mm-hmm. So I think when you said that, when the things that you were feeling when you were in your mother's womb, that's developing, your brain is developing. So naturally you take on some of those things, and you're not even out the womb yet.
Yeah.
So it starts very early. And then so what happens is, because, you know, you've already started taking on all of these expressions and all of these traumas that you have no clue about, but as you are developing, they are developing you.
Yes.
So the moment that we start, you know, from birth, and we start living life a little bit, by the time we get to this adult stage, oh my goodness, we can be, you know, for the lack of a better word, we can be full of a whole lot of stuff and not really understand why or where it came from, or even why, you know, why we feel a certain way. And then you're absolutely right. You may have that friend that says to you quite nonchalantly, girl, if you don't get yourself together.
Okay.
But it's not that easy, because I think that one thing I think we take for granted when we deal with other people, one, I don't think we sympathize enough or even empathize enough to understand, you know, that person, they don't manage their lives, or they don't manage situations the way that we do. And I think we take for granted thinking that just because we quote unquote got it together, or we handle it a little better or differently, then they should do the same. And I don't think that we give each other enough credit to allow us to feel how we feel, you know, in the process of trying to heal the way that we need to heal. So I appreciate you sharing that, because that's good. I believe it does start in the womb.
And you know, so Tish, here's something that will even more blow your mind. So there's been studies that have shown that even the effects of trauma generations ago affect us and affects our DNA. Okay. And so the study of what turns a gene on and off is called epigenetics. Okay. And so scientists have discovered and have found that slavery, okay, and the traumas that we have been through as African Americans, we're dealing with now. And so if you couple that and deal, if you think about how we experience our own traumas, okay, we may have experienced trauma in utero, and then not to mention our DNA, you know, that we've received from, that has been passed down from generation to generation, it's changed because of trauma. So this thing runs deep, and we're dealing with stuff and we don't even understand why we're dealing with things the way that we're dealing with things. You know, why am I feeling like this? Why am I? It is so deep. And if we don't know and understand and begin to peel back these layers, we'll continue to have these types of stigmas tied and associated with mental health, because we don't understand it fully.
Right.
I just want to bring it back to, I know the big word that we've been saying a lot tonight has been trauma. And while, you know, people think they know what trauma is, and I was like, okay, yeah, trauma is this, you know, we think we know. Could you like just give us like a little clarity, like what is trauma for those who may think that they know what it is, but they actually don't really know what it is? And how can it affect you, as we were talking about growing up and things like that?
Sure. So trauma is an event that overwhelms a person beyond their ability to cope or handle it. So when an event happens and the person is overwhelmed and they respond with fear or horror or hopelessness, that response, or it's beyond their capacity to cope. That's basically what trauma is. And so the traumatic events, to give an example, is like, you know, emotional, physical, sexual abuse, grief, neglect, violence, war, or even medical intervention as a child can be traumatic.
And I think just like you're saying, everything that you've been given, some people don't think it's traumatic, but grief could be very traumatic for some people. I recently lost an aunt, and unexpectedly, and her kids are just so heartbroken. It breaks my heart, because you're like, man, like, but that is very traumatic for them. You know, one day you're here, and then boom, you're gone. And people don't know how to, yes, death is certain, but to cope with that. And so it's been very hard watching them trying to deal with it. And I think people really don't realize what trauma looks like. They just associate it with something very very violent or very like a stage that you go through or something like that. When it could be something, I don't want to say simple, but the simple as a loss.
Yeah.
That is something very traumatic. Even, for a young adult woman who got pregnant and the guy bounced out on her, that could be a very traumatic event.
Yeah.
And I don't think people really correlate the two as being traumatic, but it's different events. It doesn't have to be something on an extreme scale. It could be something very minute to one person.
Right.
So that's why I want to, just hear your clarity on trauma.
That's so important to and to kind of expound a little bit, because you are absolutely right. Trauma is not a one size fits all type of thing, right? What is traumatic for one person is not traumatic for another. And I'll give you an example. My sister is terrified of needles. She's terrified of blood. She hates anything that has to do with medicine, but I love needle. Like I love medicine. I love giving IVs, like that type of thing excites me, but she's terrified. So going to the doctor, she would kick and scream, and, we'd have to force her. And I would, then I thought it was silly, and girl, you better get in there and, act right. Stop acting silly, but unknowingly, I was basically exacerbating her trauma and making it worse. And I didn't know that. And so, to me, that's silly. Like, how can you be afraid of, fuzzy animals? But some people are. And if something like that touches them, or if they're in close proximity, they like wig out. And for other people who, love cuddly, soft things, they'll look at them like, what's wrong with you? So it's different.
Yeah. I think that goes back to, I think if we are a little more sensitive to one another, then we can, try to help people manage through life a little better or a little differently. And you mentioned earlier when you were giving the example, I like the way that you said, and I continue to use the word better, but it's not necessarily better. It's just different. So indifferent doesn't mean that it's bad, good, or indifferent. That's just, it's different because they have to find a way, those that are affected, in a mental, in a way that they are having certain traumas or having certain things affect them in such a way that they find themselves hard to cope. You have to understand it's different for them as it may be different for you. And because it's different, they're different doesn't look like you're different. It doesn't mean it's bad. Because they have to find a way that's going to help them most cope to get through whatever they're trying to get through.
Yes. But then sometimes, though, their coping is bad or maladaptive, because then you have, people who experience trauma are more likely to smoke cigarettes. Okay, well, then the smoking cigarettes in itself, after, it increases your risk for cancer, increases your risk for hypertension. And so all those, so it's maladaptive, I guess, if we were to put a term so that it would be, I guess, offensive, maladaptive. So it's your ability to adapt to that, but it's harmful. For example, in the I guess the study that kind of started the whole ACE study thing, the doctors from Kaiser Permanente were studying obesity, and when they were discovering obesity, they found that a lot of the patients who were obese had experienced child abuse. And so the adaptation of eating more, right? When you're stressed, there are some people who eat more, there's some people who eat less. And so the eating more, if you eat more or if you eat less and it's too much of anything, it can be harmful to you.
Okay, right. So would it be fair to say that, a lot of times when people are engaging in activities that are not their best choices, would it be fair to say that there's probably some trauma or some underlying issue attached to it?
Oh, definitely. You can definitely say that, because what studies have shown is 7 out of 10 adults have experienced trauma.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. And so if you're at a mall and you see 10 people, you can pretty much guarantee that 7 of those 10 people have experienced trauma, 70%. That is a heck of a lot.
Yeah.
That's more than half of the population. And so when you see these types of numbers and you start digging deep and you hear about things like the opiate crisis, and you hear about things like hypertension and diabetes and heart disease, and especially when you hear that African Americans are at the highest risk of this, and African Americans are more likely to die from this condition, and African Americans have this more than any other. But if you look at what we have been through, and you look at how even the epigenetics affect us, then you begin to understand, there's a reason why this person is doing drugs. They're not just, addicted to drugs because they like it. There's something underlining that they're trying to treat, because many times we have failed to help, right? We have failed to either identify, they have even come to providers or come to people for help. They've cried out for help, and we failed to be able to get to the root cause of the issue. Because if they may not have ever even discussed it, they might not even remember it.
Right.
And so in practice now for me, I know that I need to find the root cause. I can't just treat the disease. I need to figure out, okay, what happened to this person? Did this person experience something in their childhood that has, put them at more risk of developing depression or anxiety, instead of just saying, okay, I'm gonna give you a pill and treat the anxiety. It's a requirement for also the patients to be comfortable with you. And so you have to be able to build rapport with your patients. You have to be able to build trust. And sometimes that takes time. So the best things that providers can do is just be honest and say, hey, it took you years to get like this. Not to say it's going to take years to fix you, but it's going to take some time. And so I just want you to know and understand that this is not a overnight type of fix. I can't give you a pill, a magic pill that can fix it. If I could, I would. I'd be rich right now. I wouldn't even have to be here, but I can't. But what I can do is teach you how to cope and deal with things. And I can educate you on some of the things that you're feeling. And then together as partners, right, we'll come up with a treatment plan, and then we'll work on this thing as a team. I think that teamwork piece is very important.
So I guess going into, we're talking about, the effects of mental illness or just, mental issues. Can you elaborate a little bit regarding, the effects on the mind or your memory or things of that nature?
Definitely. And so we talked about a lot of things, right? It's a lot of things kind of thrown out. Right. And we talked about the different nervous systems and things like that. And so one of the things, one of the books that I have read is called The Body Keeps Score. And it's by a doctor named Bessel van der Kolk. And he's like a pioneer when it comes to trauma and PTSD and things like that. But one of the things that they have found is that trauma can affect the area of the brain, which is the prefrontal cortex, that is responsible for like our personalities, right? Reasoning, making those higher level decisions, complex thought processes and things like that. It also affects the area in the brain that is responsible for our emotions. And then it also affects our hippocampus and our memory. And so whenever you go through trauma, your brain says, okay, I need to protect you, so I'm going to block out this memory, right? Then that memory can kind of go into another area. And so you have like the long-term memory, you have the short-term memory. And so a lot of your memory can be fragmented. And that's why sometimes you'll have those flashbacks. You'll have those visions, or you'll see like, man, I remember this, but I don't know why, or what happened there. I keep seeing this in my mind, right? And so I'll give you an example. I was in a very toxic and abusive relationship in my first marriage. And my kids will often bring up things that has happened and I totally cannot remember. And I mean, like, not just, remember it somewhat and be kind of, have a foggy memory. No, I can't remember it at all. And so I started to, like, I'll joke with them and be like, child, I can barely remember your name, and stuff like that. But I felt guilty. So I would turn and go away. And I'm like, man, I cannot remember this. My son asked me, what was one of my kids' like first words? Most parents, or a lot of parents, will hold on to the information and be able to explain that. I couldn't remember it all. And in fact, I couldn't remember when when they crawled, all of those milestones, I totally could not remember. And so I began to feel so guilty until I began to study how trauma affects your memory. And so if you think about, as a mother, as a parent, those things are so important to you. And if you've experienced stress, if you've experienced trauma and you're having those kind of memory issues, you will begin to feel kind of bad. And that will cause you to some people to go into a deeper depression. And so for me, I've learned to forgive myself, right? And to say, hey, my brain did what it's supposed to do. It protected me from that very traumatic time period. And so there are some things I just can't remember. And I'm okay with that, because I'm still here. Instead of having a mental breakdown, I'm here and I have all cognitive functions and I can have a relationship with my kids.
Piggyback off of what you just said. I don't think a lot of people know this because I just don't share a lot of stuff, but I can say the same thing about me being pregnant, like right after I graduated from college. And that time period, as I'm getting older now, I'm like, that was traumatic for me because, like you just said, I don't remember when she first started crawling. All those significant events, I had no recollection of. And I think for me, it was just, I was in the mode of trying to get through that period of time. And so that really struck a chord with me, because I'm kind of like I said, as I'm growing older, I'm like, dang, like maybe that was my traumatic moment. And I really didn't realize how traumatic it was until I got older. And so I'm sitting here just being like, okay, like, and triggers, like something could go, something that reminds me of that certain part of my life. And I'm just kind of like, boom, like just mine just like, poof. So I definitely, when you said that, that struck a chord with me, because I definitely was in a similar situation where I blocked out things I didn't realize I was blocking out until you just said it just now. So that was good.
And can you think about just knowing that and how that can affect women all over, right? And so just knowing that piece, how many other mothers who have went through being a single mother, right? Carrying your baby by yourself. I remember when I was carrying my oldest son, I was alone more nights than being with his father, and I was married. But I remember crying so much, right? I remember just holding my stomach, rubbing my stomach, just crying like, God, how did I get here? Why am I in this situation? And then when you go through life, right, you don't think about those things, and you feel like, man, was I present? Like sometimes I was even asking, what kind of mother am I? I don't even remember, and I felt so bad. But when I got this information, and that's why knowledge is so powerful, because once I studied this, it just made so much more sense. Now I get it. Now I understand why I can remember this, but not this.
Right.
Now I get why, when like I said earlier, when I hear this song, sometimes smells trigger things. And I, will get all nervous and get like, what is wrong with me? Yeah. Now I get it. And so now it makes sense. And I'm not alone in that, because sometimes when we go through things, right, we feel isolated and alone, like, what's wrong with me?
Right. I think that's good. I think that's very important to also make mention of, you're not alone. You're not the only one. And there could be other people feeling the way that you do. And so I'm hoping that that's some encouragement to someone to, to seek help, or at least talk to someone and talk it out, because, they're not by themselves and they can get through.
Exactly. And I think in our community, there are a lot of things that we can do, especially those of us who are aware and who have the knowledge, right? And the number one thing that we can do is just educate. Right. Just educate other people and raising awareness so that we can know and understand how things that have happened in our culture and in our environments that have affected us and can affect and impact our children. So if you have this conversation with multiple people and you spread this awareness, and then a mother will say, okay, instead of me staying in this toxic relationship, let me pack my bags and get out of here, because staying in this abusive and toxic relationship is not only affecting me, but this is affecting my children and could potentially affect my grandchildren. Right. And so education is a big factor. Another way, and the number two, I would say, is just getting involved and petitioning like our lawmakers for programs for parents who can have a better work-life balance. It makes no sense for a woman when she has a child, or even a father when they have a child, to have to go back to work immediately. Those few months are so important to the development of that child. They need that bonding. And that separation from that mother can be traumatizing to that infant. Right? So just being, more aware and petitioning lawmakers to implement those kind of programs is very important. Another number three, another way is to promote the education of this topic to adults and professionals who are around children. Tish, you mentioned prevention, right? Recognizing these things early. Well, if adults that are around children, you have different programs at the Y, and you have coaches, basketball coaches, football coaches. These people spend a lot of time with children. Well, if they notice that those children are being neglected, don't feel like it's not my business,
right?
And I'm not going to get involved. No, you need to get involved, because the quicker you get involved, the faster that this child can come out of this toxic environment.
Right.
And then also teaching children and parents about healthy relationships.
Okay.
That is so important, because studies have shown that even if one parent is neglecting or emotionally abusing the child, having a parent that another parent or another adult who is nurturing, who is loving, and that child feels secure with, can help mitigate some of the effects of that trauma. Okay. And that, in that negative relationship. And then also just important to teach children about healthy relationships when it comes to recognizing good touch, bad touch, right? I think in our community, we don't speak enough about that.
Agreed.
And then just also promoting financial stability in our community, right? We need to preach financial literacy.
Okay.
And education as much and as often as we can, because we know that a lack of education and low social economic status increases one's risk for ACEs.
Okay.
You know, it's just something that we need to be aware of when it comes to finances and stuff like that. Just in education, promoting. Everybody doesn't have to go to college, right? But
Right.
you do need to be educated. You don't have to go to formal education, but you need to educate yourself. The
Right.
more you know, the more empowered you can be. And so personally, I like Psychology Today for people to be able to find providers and therapists to be able to connect with someone who specializes in trauma. So, and that's the last thing for me is finding a therapist, finding someone who specializes in trauma. And you can go on psychologytoday.com. You can put in, if you want it to be male or female, the specialties, and you can find people. You can type in, the miles within, certain mile radius, and you can get providers there, because you need to see someone who can help you work through these things and can kind of help you turn those maladaptive coping mechanisms into more positive coping mechanisms.
Would you recommend that everyone at least consider taking an ACE test to see where their scores are? Or is that something that, we can kind of talk it through or talk it out through different levels of therapies as we see fit?
I think it's important. It can work in both ways, but I think it's very important for people to know, right, and understand, because if you have developed good coping mechanisms and you're not dealing with depression and you're not dealing with anxiety and you're not dealing with those mental illnesses, but you do recognize that maybe you eat a little bit more than you should, or maybe you can't focus and you procrastinate, or you kind of have some of those habits, maybe doing the ACE score can kind of help you understand, oh, well, this may be why, because I've experienced this. And then it just puts in, okay, so I'll give an example. When I took the ACE score, when I did the ACE score, I tested 10, right? So 10 out of 10. And that's like, if you score that, like studies show that 20 years off your life, you can expect a person to die earlier, right? 20 years to be shaved off their life if they have an ACE score of 10. And I bind that. So,
I don't blame you.
I don't receive it at all. But again, it shows that just because you have these ACEs doesn't mean that you'll develop all of these diseases, right? It doesn't mean that you'll develop these mental illnesses, but it does give you perspective. And what it does is it brings it to reality and say, okay, I'm more likely, or I'm at higher risk of developing these things. I better eat right.
Okay.
I am at higher risk of developing addiction. I better watch, drinking. If I drink, I better, make sure that it's controlled, or I might not want to drink at all because I'm predisposed to addiction. Mm-hmm. So it just helps you bring awareness. Okay. And then it also gives you the ability to forgive yourself. Right? It gives you the information so that you can show yourself grace and understand. Like when we go back to my example of not being able to remember those milestones in my children's life, I can give myself grace and say, okay, this is the reason why I'm doing that. Or when my mind is scattered and I can't focus, I understand why, and I can give myself grace. And I can extend that grace to other people because more times than not, they probably have experienced the trauma too.
That's good. I think that's a good place, a good way for us to wrap it up, because I think you're right. And you said it earlier, and I'm glad that you went back and revisited it, because I think it's important that we have to learn to forgive ourselves. Mm-hmm. I think that's part of our healing. And in order for us to heal, we have to be gentle with our own spirits. And then if we're gentle with our own selves, then we can, learn to be gentle with other people. And so I appreciate all the information that you've offered, and you've given a lot of good information. And as I mentioned before, I'm hoping that, someone would take this information and understand that resilience is possible. And they're not alone. And there are, therapies and professionals out there that are able to help. And so that they don't have to deal with their insecurities or their traumas or, their situations that could very well keep them in that dark place. They don't have to deal with that alone. And it is possible to bounce back. And we can, get to that next place to be our better selves.
Definitely. But thank you for having me. I appreciate you guys for giving me this time too. That's so near and dear to my heart.
Well, we are certainly glad that you were able to give us your time, and we don't take it for granted. We appreciate your gifts, we appreciate your knowledge, and we appreciate your desire to even want to join us to share. And so I'm faithful to believe that it will make a difference in someone's life, which is what we are aiming to do. So it's not to be taken for granted at all. But I would like to ask you to share with people, if someone wants to get in touch with you, where can they find you? Or if they just want to pop in every now and then and see what good stuff you have to offer, where can they find you?
So sure, they can find me on the social media outlets, Facebook, Instagram. I'm in the process of developing my website, and so that information will be made public on those outlets as well. Okay. And so if anyone wants to email me, they can email me at LaToyaNtlabati@gmail.com.
Well, we certainly appreciate your time, LaToya, and you have been with Women Living Intentionally.
Thank you.
You're welcome.